Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. One question I get asked all the time is, do I have and use ND filters with my DJI Spark? Well, the answer to that question is simply no. I don't have them and I don't use them. But anyhow, for those of you who are considering ND filters, today I want to show you exactly what an ND filter can do. Now, this isn't going to be a deep technical dive. I basically just want to show what an ND filter does to the look of your footage, and then you can decide whether or not they're right for you. Now, like I said, I don't have an ND filter for my Spark, but I do have one for my SLR, and it doesn't quite fit on the Spark or work with the Spark, but for the purposes of this demonstration, it's exactly the same thing, works the same way, and it's gonna be just fine. So yeah, let's get right to it. So what is a ND or neutral density filter? Well, basically a neutral density filter just blocks the amount of light passing through the lens, and it does that without changing the color of that light. That's it. That's all it does. It blocks light. ND filters come in all shapes and sizes. This one for my SLR, it's a circular variable ND filter. Polar Pro makes great filters for the DJI Spark, and those ones just clip right onto the gimbal. And some cameras even have ND filters built right in, like this Canon G7X Mark II. And let me tell you, that's a really handy feature. In photography and filmmaking, we want to use ND filters to block light in order to maintain a specific exposure in very bright conditions. And we want to do that for two reasons. One, it's so we can use a slower shutter speed to produce more natural looking motion blur. Or two, it's so we can use a wider aperture for shallower depth of field. Now, the Spark only has a fixed aperture lens, so that second one doesn't apply to us. The only thing we can really do to affect the look of our footage is to use a slower shutter speed. There is a generally accepted principle in filmmaking called the 180-degree shutter rule. And it basically states that the optimal shutter speed for producing the most natural looking motion blur is 1 over twice the frame rate. So if you're shooting at 30 frames per second, then your shutter speed should be set to 1/60th of a second, double the frame rate. If you're shooting at 24 frames per second, then your shutter speed should be 1/50th of a second, and so on and so on. Now, the Spark only shoots video at 30 frames per second, so our optimal shutter speed is going to be 1/60th of a second. Now, if you're shooting outside on a bright sunny day, your shutter speed is going to be way beyond 1/60th of a second. So we need to block some light, and that is exactly what you use an ND filter for. I shot some clips at different shutter speeds so you can see how the shutter speed impacts the look of the footage. Now, the first clip was shot at 1/500th of a second, and the second clip was shot at 1/50th of a second, which is double my frame rate of 24 frames per second. So this is the footage shot at 1/500th of a second. And while the video is playing, the effect of the fast shutter speed may not be immediately noticeable, but when we pause it or step through frame by frame, you can see the still images are crisp and the text is quite readable. And the same goes for this chunk of footage that was shot with the DJI Spark. It's shot on a bright day at a fast shutter speed, and there is really no motion blur. We can easily read the details on the passing train. Now, here's the footage shot at 1/50th of a second, and we can really see the difference when we pause the footage. It's really noticeable. The text on the side of the train is really blurry, and it's almost unreadable. And if we put these clips side by side, you can really see the difference that the shutter speed makes to the look of the footage. Also keep in mind that motion blur does not just apply to moving objects. Motion blur will also be evident as your Spark travels past stationary objects. And the closer you are to those objects, the more pronounced that blur will be. Well, that's it for this one, guys. I hope that helped you to understand how an ND filter can affect the look of your Spark footage. And as always, thank you so much for watching. Please hit that thumbs up. Questions and comments are always welcome. And yeah, you guessed it. I'll see you next time.